What's up, guys? I know I normally talk about nerdy stuff on this channel and my favorite fandoms, and I do a little bit of that in this video because we can't non-talk about it. But one thing that I really wanted to talk about that's really important to me is Christian movies, and they don't always work. Why is that? And is there one Christian movie that stands out above the rest? And if that's something you're interested in, please watch this video. It's also just a really cool, exciting thing for me because I got to talk to one of my best friends on the planet who also loves movies, and my favorite YouTuber who also loves movies, but one thing that I love is that he shares my faith. And it's just really fun to get to talk to them and work on this video together. And so I hope you'll check it out, and let's get right into this interview with Sean Chandler and Kara Lewis.
We are all absolutely love Jesus. I believe, Kara, you're a PK. Sean, we're a pastor at one point, and I joke I'm a DK. I'm a deacon's kid, but I grew up in church, Sunday, Wednesday, whenever the doors are open, all that fun stuff. But I guess we also have in common that we're not fans of Christian movies. And all of us are planning to make our living or are making our living something related to movies, whether it's still being a film composer, film director, and then Sean, you talk about movies for a living. So, but I guess, again, none of us are fans of Christian movies, and we just want to talk about why they don't work and why that is, because I mean, for me at least, when I announced I was going to switch my major to film, one of the first questions I got was, "Oh, do you want to work for one of those people that make all the good Christian movies?" And I told my mother I wanted an Oscar or an award for finding a nice way to say, no, absolutely not. Anyway, so let's just talk about what are some of the biggest problems with Christian movies, and then also let's get into a Christian movie that does work, which is The Case for Christ. So, I guess, Kara, what would you say are some of the biggest problems with Christian movies that really just irritate you?
Okay, so first of all is not fitting a good story beat form, which for us is the Blake Snyder beat sheet. That's the only thing I've really learned about in screenwriting class, and a lot of them don't follow that. Second is character motivations. A lot of them are unclear or fuzzy or just based on an ideology. Like, I am the perfect Christian mentor, therefore I do all the perfect Christian mentor things, or I am the atheist antagonist, therefore I do all the atheistic antagonistic things, or I am the Kendrick Brothers protagonist that got asked to do this challenge by the perfect Christian mentor, and my only motivation is whatever they tell me to do. So character motivation and form, and then just I think there is some stereotyping based on belief systems, which is I don't think it reflects reality. So those are probably my top complaints.
Don, I saw you nodding, so I feel like you're going to agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it comes down to, as soon as you say I'm making a Christian movie, you've put yourself in a specific box that has expectations and rules associated with it. Yes. And you're saying what the message of your film is, as well as who the audience is for, all kind of set up into it. And when you talk about Christian movies, it's not specifically just a story that features grace, because that can be any kind of different stories, and it's not a story that necessarily has a redemptive arc, and that can be all kinds of different stories. It's not just that it has Christian characters or whatever, because that can be all kinds of different movies. As soon as you say, "Well, I'm making a Christian movie," there's this assumption that at some point in time, the movie's going to pause to have someone say to another character, "Well, you really need Jesus in your life. You need to realize that all those bad things you're doing, that's sin. That's why Jesus died on the cross for your sins." Like, you kind of assume something like that will happen. At least that's the older days, the Kirk Cameron era in particular. It always paused the movie to have an overt gospel presentation. And then probably the more ones from the last 15-ish years, it moved away from like literally someone pulling out a gospel tract, and it moved more towards they're like sermon illustration, the movie, where people would be like, "Oh," a lot of these would started coming out when I was a pastor, and people at the church would say, "Oh, it's such a good movie," and they'd ask me, or I'd ask what the plot of the film was, and they'd describe it to me, and it's like, "You just described like a sermon illustration. There's a firefighter that's struggling with pornography, and he's going to learn that that's bad, and it's going to save his marriage." And it's like so heavy-handed and direct and it just pauses at a different moment in time to say something different. You get to this, there's always this moment where it pauses to just look at the camera, but like might as well be looking at the camera and say, hey, audience member, today's lesson is, and then it just says it.
Yeah.
And you classic cinematic adage, show, don't tell. And
Absolutely.
at the core of Christian movies is that idea that it's like you can't be subtle. You have to actually say it. And there's a side to that you can understand where people are coming from of you want to boldly proclaim the gospel and not be afraid to say it. But telling a bold story, having a bold arc for a character that feels like a real person, that's being bold too. You don't have to just monologue and dictate it. And I think the other side that kind of factors into it is as soon as you make a movie that's assumed to be for a Christian audience, you're just immediately basically saying, well, it has to be church friendly. It has to be PG. Like, or like maybe PG-13 for the certain things that make it PG-13 are okay, but there's a certain set of things you can't do because it's a Christian movie. It has to be family friendly and safe. And that's just pick up your Bible and read Judges, ring Song of Solomon, like really like just read through your Bible. And these terms that we use that, the K-love, safe, family friendly, that's not what the Bible is. That's not what Jesus was. And I get there's a side to it that I do understand and when they say all of that. But as soon as you put it in that box, you're limiting what you can actually do with your characters. You're limiting the arcs that you can have, the ideas that you can explore, the themes that can be handled. And so how do you turn it to everyone's a stereotype? Why does that happen? Because you can't have the nuance of humanity. You have to be able to have it very direct, and you have to like take off the rough edges. And so all of a sudden it turns into this very watered down version of a story. And we pause to look at the camera and tell you what the message is.
Yeah, so I think I would totally agree with both of you. And I think the biggest thing, like you said, I mean, sermon illustration in the movie or whatever. And I agree with a lot of the lessons that they're trying to teach, but I'm like, listen, if I want to hear a sermon, I'll listen to a podcast. If I go to the movie, I want to be entertained. And also, even just like teaching lessons through storytelling is great. I mean,
right.
I think even like Black Panther had something to say and it told it through a story. I know you said that multiple times. And I mean, I always call Lord of the Rings Christian movies that weren't made by Christians, but they have some great lessons you can learn from it. And I mean, doesn't have to be a Christian movie, or it doesn't have to be a sermon illustration to teach lessons. If you write your characters well and write the dialogue well, it'll teach lessons. And I mean, make an impact on people. And I think it's also what you said too about both of you said everybody's like flawless and perfect. And I think that's one thing that both
such a stereotype of a sinner or the so like I think the worst example that comes to my mind wasn't just sermon illustration of the movie, it was email forward the movie God's Not Dead.
Yes.
Where there were back when you guys were about 4, there was a set of email forwards going out that everyone's mother would send out these email forwards about the evil secularizing professor, where this kid goes to college and his professor and just lists like a stereotype of an argument for evolution. And then you get to the end of it in the big and then this one kid in the room stands up to him and calls him out on all of the things that he's saying and just totally owns the professor. And you get to the end of it, the big reveal. Who is this wise Christian? Albert Einstein. And it was like just like the stupidest, like, well, this is not real. What are you talking about? Albert Einstein, the Christian apologist? All you did was put the name of a smart person at the end as like, what are you doing? But so there's a series of these, and sometimes it would be different people, but it was the same exact email forward that everybody's mom and aunt sent out to everybody they knew. Like, look at these great arguments against evolution. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then you get to jump forward. They put out a movie, God's Not Dead. It's literally named after a popular song of the time. The plot of it is about an evil secularizing professor. And that's a real thing. When I was in community college, now, as I'm even saying this, 20 years ago, I had a teacher that did some of this stuff, but it wasn't a stereotype. And you go through in this movie, and it's like he's mad at God over something, and the end of the movie isn't even like a redemptive arc for him. It's just like he's embarrassed. I think he dies in a car accident, and then they go to a Newsboys concert where they run into the Duck Dynasty family. This is a real movie that they put out. And at the end of it, it's like, if you love this movie and you love Jesus, text everybody you know God's not dead. Mm-hmm. So when this movie came out, I just had like my phone lighting up with people like, God's not dead. Like, what are we doing here? What is going on here? And so I've never actually seen the movie, but I've seen a few. There's a guy named the Nostalgia Critic that kind of broke down Christian movies, kind of the same conversation we're having. I'm like, why are they doing this? Like, why are they all so bad?
I think
Nostalgia Christian. What is it? It's Say Goodnight, Kevin. Is
that's
the
what I was going to say.
That's what I Nostalgia Christian, I think, is off Nostalgia Critic as well. Something like that. Yes. But so, and I know him a little bit, so we've interacted some.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's a wild deal because I watched his videos for so long, and then my channel took off and met him later on. But that's fascinating the way some of that works. But anyway, that's a rabbit trail. But yeah, it's like watching it or reading about it, being like, this is outrageous. Like, who thought this was a good idea? But that's what they put forward, is like we got Christian movies.
Yeah. Well, I literally saw a meme, and I saw a meme that I was just dying laughing. It's one of those like change my mind memes or something like that. And it's literally like, God's Not Dead franchises, Fast and the Furious for Christians, changed my mind. And I was just dying. And I'm like, yeah, that's basically true. And this is a rabbit trail too, but there's a talking about everybody's mom and aunt. There's literally a Facebook page or an Instagram page called Crazy Christian Aunt. And it's like this young person that posts like a crazy Christian aunt. Mm-hmm. And they post these stupid memes like, I bet none of my friends will share that they love Jesus. Like that kind of stuff. And it's like, again, that's the thing that bugs me about Christian culture is, oh, you didn't like Christian movies, so then I guess you're not a very good Christian. It's like, no, that's stupid. You're basing my faith off of how much I liked a movie. Come on. Or
right.
And again, it's ironic. I think we talked about this a little bit last night. It's ironic that they say that because and then they judge secular culture for basically doing the same thing. Not saying either is right, but like, oh, you didn't like Turning Red, you're a misogynist.
Especially like at Liberty, and I think it's interesting to see because the Jesus Revolution, they had the world premiere at Liberty University, and Catherine went, and they had so much hype for this movie. And I think it's funny because you always hear the hype before and after the movie as if the movie never happened. But we're supporting this full on because it's a Christian movie. It's this idea, I think it's an idea by the studios mainly. I mean, Jesus Revolution did a job at not presenting all the Christian characters as perfect. In fact, none of them were, which is a thing I liked about it. But I think there's pressure from the writers who write most Christian movies to not make Christians look bad because they're marketing it to a bunch of Christians. And there's for the audience to not make Christian movies look bad because they're a bunch of Christians and they want to support each other. They want to have this community of Christianity is good. It's the answer, right? That's the point of making the movie. And so they're so scared to criticize each other. Like, the film can't criticize its audience and the audience can't criticize the filmmakers because they're putting themselves in the same camp from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but that's one thing that Case for Christ really does differently. And I like it a lot. So yeah, that's probably the other thing is just, there's no room for criticism.
The campus pastor, who's the son of the founder, was like giving this big speech about how, this is so important to tell people about Jesus, and you should invite all your non-Christian friends to see it. And I wanted so badly, and I really wanted to, I didn't, but I so wanted to be like, excuse me, I'm not inviting any of my non-Christian friends. I'm inviting my Christian friends to get an idea of how stuck-up religious people can be really bad. Because that's one of the messages of the movie that they talk about. They're not afraid to address. Yeah, when Christians are stuck up, it looks really bad. And it does not portray Jesus very well.
They didn't explain Christianity in that movie. They didn't have that pause moment where they explained it. There was like the big dramatic scene was him getting baptized, and I'm like, I do not recall in this movie anywhere where they said why anyone needs to be baptized. It's just assumed y'all are Christians, you know what this is, you get it. It's fine.
Well, and if you're going to make a movie that's intended for Christians, have your message be something that's specifically for them.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to preach at the choir, say something the choir needs to hear, not just something that the choir will high five.
Yeah, like that's why like I think, I mean, I don't like War Room that much, but I think it worked better than some Christian movies because they weren't trying to make it a gospel message. They were trying to talk about prayer and stuff like that, which is a good message to hear. Every Christian can hear a good message about prayer. But again, I'll listen to a sermon about prayer, not watch a movie about it.
Well, and to kind of go a little bit broader on what we're talking about, whatever that is, that movies that tie into a message that people believe in, it creates kind of this herd mentality that you can't if you criticize the film, you're criticizing the message. So two examples from the month of July, Sound of Freedom and Barbie, two opposite sides to it. But Sound of Freedom movie comes out, a bunch of people on the right pushing the film. And if you in any way criticize this film, well, it must be you're a creep that's for child trafficking. What? I'm evaluating a movie. What are you talking about? Flip side, if you criticize Barbie, it must be because you hate women. or I don't like that it monologues at the end. Like it just, there's that thing that we have to take movies that have a message, some sort of forward momentum movement attached to them, and the way you defend the thing that you like and the way you defend the message is to like, it's a character flaw if you criticize this.
Exactly.
And when you make a totally objective statement that you would make about any movie, but all of a sudden you're a bad Christian, you hate women, you're for child trafficking. No, the movie just has bad pacing. Like, it's nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah, and a lot of women that I've talked to that was like, yeah, Barbie didn't work. I didn't like it. Like, it's not a man and a woman thing. And like one of my friends,
right,
he was like actually more excited for Barbie than Oppenheimer. He was going to do the Barbieheimer thing, except before he did. And I texted him. I was like, so what did you think? And he was like, Oppenheimer is better than Barbie. Barbie was way too preachy. And he gives me this long message. And I just messaged him back, said, well, I'm actually for feminism, but not the way the movie, it sounds like the movie portrays it. And he's like, oh, yeah, I agreed with a lot of what the movie had to say. I just didn't like how they did it.
Right. Well, and I think that's the side to it of, I know one of the things that's real frustrating for me, as a 40-year-old white man, there's like just targets put on me, and not any way to say that I have it worse than anyone else, but in the specific thing that I do, if you criticize a movie like Barbie, there's a batch of people that just immediately go, well, of course the 40-year-old white man is going to say that. Like, what are you're doing the exact thing you're accusing me of doing. I criticized the movie, and you made this personal in the exact, like literally the exact accusation you're making against me, that I'm judging it because of that's what you're doing to me. And I have large amounts of things where I'll watch a movie with my wife, and she's way angrier about it. She's way more frustrated, and there's a resentful side to it. When a movie presents itself as speaking for all women, like this is how women really have it. This is what women really think. And so if you agree with that mindset, then it's like a high five movie. And if you don't 100% agree with it, it's like, why are you speaking for me? Like you're trying to minimize me. And if I voice my issues with the film or your message, then all of a sudden, like I'm a traitor, or I'm just like working for the patriarchy, or like something like that. Like there's all these times where my wife is way more frustrated with these things than I am. And the fact that her words would have more weight than mine just because she's a woman, she's resentful of that. Like, it's not a better idea because it's coming from me instead of you. And there's the way that's handled in some of these contexts. But I mean, it applies to Christian movies too, of the ways in which we diminish people over their opinions, and don't listen to them. And why aren't you defending it? You should be defending this thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm like, and I mean, I don't know. I'm like, I understand. Like, people don't like it, and I've learned it's not a good idea to say, yeah, the Kendrick brothers movies are just straight up horrible movies and they shouldn't be made. They're dumpster fires. Flywheel is a dumpster fire. It's a home movie dumpster. It's awful. It's like watching a home movie. It sucks.
It's probably not the most diplomatic way to make that point.
Yeah, exactly. So I've tried to be more diplomatic, and I was literally having a conversation with my mom the other day where I was like, okay, so what I figured out works really well is if I say, okay, Mom, I'm a screenwriter. Our professor says we're screenwriters because we've written short films. We had a screenwriting class together. That's how Kara and I had a screenwriting class together. That's how we know each other.
Is that where you read Save the Cat?
Yes.
Yes,
and
that is.
Anyway, which I use for a presentation. So they talk about so I'm like, okay, Mom, all right, here, I'm going to tell you how I would fix a movie. I'm not saying let's throw the movie out. This is what I'd fix. And I'm like, Mom, I can fix a problem that you've always had with Fireproof. There's a part in it that you don't like. I can fix it. And she's like, oh, okay, fine. So I figured out that it works much better if you just say, instead of saying these are the problems with it, objectively, these are the problems. I don't have a prejudice against it because it's a Christian movie. But it's just, hey, if there was a non-Christian movie with the same problems, I'd make the same criticisms. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. And even like, I mean, again, this is one thing that's so interesting to me. And like I said, the afraid to criticize, like, we'll call it a fandom or a community or whatever. Any other group of fans that you talk to, they have no problem pointing out criticisms. Like Marvel, people are very vocal about, I didn't like this, and I didn't like this, and I didn't like this. Thor: The Dark World is not a great movie, or it's forgettable, right? Or would you say it's a bad movie, or would you say it's the weakest?
I mean, I'd say it's kind of falls into this weird mediocre spot where, I mean, there's a couple things that I think are not good about it, but generally speaking, it's like very slick. It's well produced. It's not like overt problems. It's just devoid of anything memorable.
Yeah.
And I think that's what so many Hollywood movies have that struggle with. They're really slick, but they don't do anything that's interesting to make them stand out. And so I make these, restaurant comparisons and stuff like that of, sure, it's totally it's totally consumable. It's not bad, but it's just a chain restaurant.
Yeah.
Making generic burger, generic salad.
Yeah.
And
I've started
that's
using
kind of what Thor: The Dark World feels like.
That's how I've started using that comparison too, because I'm like, listen, if you like McDonald's movies, you go right ahead and watch McDonald's movies. That's fine with me. Some people would rather have McDonald's than a steak.
Yeah. Do you guys have O'Charlie's where you're at?
Ooh, yes.
So they don't in Texas, but I went to Bible college in South Carolina. They had O'Charlie's, and they have delicious buttered rolls. So now I have to find a way to. You're reminding me of food that's specific to that area of the country. So now I'm thinking about how do I work in those delicious rolls.
Yeah,
that's all I remember. I don't know what else they
area.
serve. Nothing. I have no idea what else they serve there. But specifically, they bring out these rolls that are really good.
Yeah, they have that at Texas Roadhouse too.
Yeah.
We
do have those in Texas.
Yeah, they have it. Well, they should have it in Texas. Yeah, they have it I'm from Minnesota. They have it here too. But like, I mean, I'm like, listen, if you'd rather go to McDonald's and eat those burgers than you'd rather go to like a high quality restaurant, I can't stop you. I'd just rather go to a high quality restaurant. But you know what? Sometimes McDonald's is nice. So I think that's a good way to talk about movies versus this movie is bad. It's just, hey, it's McDonald's or whatever. Anyway, but so I figured out there's much better way to just say, hey, these are, anyway, yeah. So, I know what I was doing. So, and Star Wars goes too far in their criticisms. Like, you're not a true Star Wars fan unless you hate the prequels or love the prequels or whatever. Unless you
Star Wars fans can't like Star Wars. That's the rule. If you Want to be a Star Wars fan, can't like Star Wars.
Yeah.
No one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans.
Yes.
Tis true.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't know. And like, and some people just are like, I mean, Kara, you acknowledge all the problems with The Last Jedi. You just like the Luke arc. Is that correct?
No, I would rather not give my opinions on the sequels on the internet. I think I would get killed fast. So
you're wise. You are wise beyond your years.
Yeah, that's a way to die. Anyway, but
no matter what you say, you're gonna lose.
Is that what the prequels too, or is it not as bad?
I think that the prequels
bad anymore.
Yeah, it's not as bad, and I think there's safer ways to approach it. There's things you can say like, well, in light of how lifeless the sequels feel like, I have a newfound appreciation for what George Lucas was doing with the prequels. There's some flaws in the execution. I wish he had someone help him with the scripts and the dialogue, but he actually had some interesting ideas about the fall of Empire. Like, there's things that you can say that you can now praise them without it, with people being like, yeah, that's true. And some of it's just generational because there's now a generation that grew up. Those are their first Star Wars movies. Those are the ones that so jump forward, those are now the 35-year-olds and 25 to 35-year-olds. And so that kind of even changes the flavor of the discussion a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's what Kara asked me one time. She's like, didn't all the prequels come out in your lifetime? And I'm like, I don't think so. So we looked it up in May 19th, 1999. So I'm 9 months almost exactly to the day younger. And so this girl goes, well, if you want to get technical, you existed when they came out. And I'm like,
that's true. That's a good point.
I was like, well, I was 4 days past my due date. So technically I did.
There's like Star Wars fans turning on Star Wars goes all the way back to Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks and a second Death Star. But I grew up, oh, this is the best. There's these cute teddy bears that break stuff. It's amazing. And so then my disappointment started with the prequels, and all of us kind of convinced ourselves we loved Phantom Menace when it came out because it was like, we have a new Star Wars movie. But by the time Attack of the Clones came out, we were like, what's going on here? And then when Revenge of the Sith came out, I was probably at peak of my snobbery and just being a jerk in my early 20s. And so like I was like laughing out loud at parts of Revenge of the Sith in the theater. Now that was my immaturity when I think it has a lot more to offer now than I did back then. But
I think people it was laugh out loud at some pretty inappropriate times in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Darth Vader gets out of it like Frankenstein, steps out of a machine like this. Where's Padme? Where's Padme? Sorry, buddy, you killed her. No! Like, you're watching it. How did no one tell him this is not it, bro? Like, this is so weird. It feels so like this is not a good scene if it wasn't Darth Vader. This is not good dialogue. It doesn't play right. And anytime you have someone go, no, you are going like full-blown cheese mode now, corny as can be. But you did it with Darth Vader, which is, it's Darth Vader. He's not supposed to be moping over a girl and going, no. So I started laughing out loud in the theater.
Yeah. Well,
I was doing my part.
For the record, we parodied that scene for a video that we did together for like a skit,
basically
for like
a talent show.
Well, perfect. That means I wasn't out of line. I was ahead of the curve. I was the first round of people to be realize, no, this is no.
Yeah. We
George,
didn't parody.
No.
We didn't parody that whole scene. We just parodied the no. Literally, because a guy saw that his crush was walking with somebody else that he had never even talked to. It was awesome. It was epic. You gotta understand Liberty to know how funny that is, but I mean, you were the career Bible
just
college.
A bunch of Liberty tropes in a video.
I think most all Bible colleges, Christian universities, there's a lot of those same ring by spring or your money back cliches and tropes and stuff like that of people go there for their MRS degree, things like that.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So you get it. It's just, yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's bad at Liberty. It's really, 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 really bad.
So I went to Columbia International University. There's a real story where there was like a guy claimed that he went down to the local lake. God gave him a vision to tell him to ask this girl out. And then he walks up to her and asks her out, and he's like, God told me I'm supposed to ask you out. And she responded back, oh, I already knew. I was just waiting for God to tell you that. Says that this is a real, both of them said they had visions from God. They got married and they're divorced now. So
Yeah, so
you
we
literally used God to say that you're meant to be together and you're divorced. Like, that was a story you shared around college. Yikes. That's you're the perfect example of the ludicrous nature that is Christian universities, or the dating scene on Christian universities.
Yep.
God told me this. Oh, I already knew. I was just waiting for you to realize it.
That sounds like George Lucas dialogue.
That's actually
Yeah.
exactly what the trope we were using was we were parodying it. We were making it the story Beauty and the Beast, but on Liberty University. So Gaston is like this big obnoxious guy. He's like, God told me I'm gonna marry you. Belle's just like, whoa,
Yeah.
man.
And this girl that just literally, he dropped his Flames Pass, which is our student IDs, and she picked it up and gave it back to him just like any nice person would, and he was convinced that he was going to marry her. And then he goes into a version of the Gaston song that was absolutely epic that this girl wrote. So it was absolutely, it was beautiful. We were proud of that. We didn't get the whole full video in, but we were proud of it. It was awesome. But
Anyway.
it was
You want to
epic.
talk
But
about the case for Christ anytime soon?
let's talk about the King of Christ. We got distracted because that's what happens when you get riffers that went to Bible colleges together. So let's talk about a Christian movie that does work for us, which is The Case for Christ. And I guess, first of all, maybe let's do the same thing. What were some things about Christian movies? Not Christian movies. What were some things about The Case for Christ that worked for you?
You guys read the book?
I've listened to it.
Okay.
On my way back.
I actually have not.
So
I've listened to More Than a Carpenter, though, which is kind of similar.
More than a what?
More Than a Carpenter.
Josh McDowell. Yeah. So the book Case for Christ is Lee Strobel years after the events of the film, basically trying to build a case for Christ. And so it's a series of him like going and interviewing people. That's what the book is. It's him interviewing experts and then presenting the case for Christ. It's very much, you'd think it would be a documentary. It could work really well with the interviews that he's giving.
Fun fact, he went and interviewed my professor's hockey coach, Gary Habermas.
I've heard Gary Habermas speak live before.
Yeah, he speaks at Liberty. He used to be a professor. I think he's maybe retired, but he was one of my professors. Anyway,
yes.
continue.
So I when I was in Bible college, after having read Christ, I heard him I think I went to an event specifically because he was going to be there. But anyway,
continue.
So when they said they were making a book out or a movie out of the book, I was like, what are you talking about? A narrative story out of this? What are you talking about? But the other side to Lee Strobel's story is that he initially wasn't a believer, didn't believe but he was a investigative journalist. And so what makes the movie work is that it's someone's story. It's about a broken person and what like the consequences of that and their journey to find answers and being vulnerable to admit they were wrong. And so as soon as you do that, there's an actual arc in there. There's a character arc that drives the story. It's very character based. And so his struggles, his flaws, and where he finds answers. And that's his real life story. That's the real thing that happens. So the idea of using his story to introduce the idea of gospel and apologetics, that's what happened. So it rings true. It doesn't feel like these fabricated things. And you can show his flaws because the more he puts his flaws on display and makes himself look really bad, the better it makes Jesus look. That's the point of the story. And so it unlike what we mentioned before of stories that just feel like they need to like soften the edges or whatever, this is intentionally like, yeah, I was a mess before I found Jesus. And so it's built into it to actually have a character arc that ties to the gospel grace redemption arc.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said. What I really liked, like you said, was mainly just how character driven it was, and that it wasn't, mentor sent him on a mission. That was his motivation. You get from the setup of the story. What you learn, he's a journalist, he's successful, he loves his family very much, he's a good dad, he is in love with his wife after being married for a while. So he's presented, even though he's an atheist, he is a likable character. And his flaw is not he's an atheist. His flaw is he's a know-it-all. And it's almost very subtle. Because they make him a very likable character, and they don't even present being an atheist as a problem. They don't show how being an atheist hurts his life or anything. He mentions it to his daughter after, the woman mentions Jesus. And it's also, he's not presented as having an emotional hatred for Christianity. He has intellectual disagreements. And I love how he's presented as a positive character, and his atheist mentor from work is, I don't remember his name, but he's also shown to be a loving father, a good influence on other people, cares. The atheists in this film are good intentioned people, which is something I don't think we see in other Christian movies. And I think that's very important. And then just like he doesn't have he's not personally against Christianity. He just disagrees with it. He does have a personal reason to go on his quest. So his quest is driven by the desires that were given to us in the setup. He loves his wife. He loves his family. He wants to keep them in his life. And so he goes to disprove his wife's faith. It's a very personal, self-propagating kind of arc.
And I think also,
it counters his flaw of being a know-it-all.
Yeah, and arguably what he's doing is not the nicest thing to do. I mean, he's trying to disprove his wife, but he's motivated by love for her. He's not motivated because he's mad at her or anything like that. He really genuinely loves her.
Right.
And even just how there's a scene that's so interesting how he goes to talk to the psychologist or the psychiatrist or whatever she is. And
yeah, I was about to bring that up.
Yeah, and she talks to him. And before he goes, she's like, "Hey, Mr. Strobel, I'm just curious, what kind of relationship did you have with your dad?" And then he's like, complicated. And then she reads his mail basically on what it is. And yeah, I don't know if you know this, but almost all the atheists in the world, the most renowned atheists, either had a father that died when they were young or they didn't have a good relationship with them. So it affects how they see God. And I don't know, and they do such a good job. And and they do have the quote unquote gospel presentation scene, but it's not in the same way. It's very just
right.
They try to start conversations. I think that's a really excellent way to do it. So
that was another thing I noticed about the Case for Christ is you have Les's arc as well, Leslie's. And you have her, becoming a Christian, being mentored by Alfie and going on. But something I noticed that was very interesting is these very dramatic moments of faith that are skipped. We don't see them on screen. Like when Alfie said, Jesus is right. You just need to come to him. We expect, oh my gosh, Leslie's going to start crying. We're going to have the gospel presentation. We're going to be here for about 30 minutes until she finally prays and accepts Christ. And then Lee's going to respond, however. No. Hard cuts to back home after church. Lee walks in. Leslie says, I have to tell you about something. These dramatic moments. Leslie's perspective at all. We're not manipulated to affiliate with Leslie emotionally because we're still with Lee emotionally. He's our main character. And we hear it from his perspective and we get his reaction. Not only that, we get in Leslie's words what she experienced. We don't get the filmmakers giving us the message. We get Leslie telling us what she experienced. And same thing when she goes into labor early. The scene is skipped. It could have been so dramatic and it's skipped. And then we cut to the hospital and Lee walks in and he says, I'm so sorry. And she's like, it was hard, but it was okay. And then his daughter says, and we prayed and everything got better. And then you see Lee stop and you see him contemplate it. We did not get that dramatic scene in the film. We did not get the filmmakers telling us Jesus is the answer. We got to hear Lee's family's experience and see his reaction.
And it feels like something a little kid would say. Like if their mom said, we're going to pray and everything's going to get better, that's something a little kid would say. So sometimes
Yeah.
that's the biggest problem with the dialogue. I mean, it's George Lucas style dialogue. It's so on the nose. Like I think you like say it's so on the nose. It's, this is the message of the movie versus, hey, this is just something that a real character would say. This feels like something a person would say. I would say something like that. Like,
Mhm.
When I think the word nuance comes to mind in everything kind of
yes.
being discussed here of the characters feel like actual humans that that are three-dimensional, and it's not this clean and easy people in Christian category good, people in atheist category bad. The way they talk to each other isn't in monologues and presentations, and the moments that are powerful in life, they don't play like big dramatic moments in movies where music swells and you say the perfect things. They're clumsy, they're awkward, they're very profound, but the actual statement of the moment might be very simplistic. And when you see that, that feels real. It's grounded in reality because it was based on reality.
Yeah.
And there's a truth to it that you don't see in, God's Not Dead, where it's just hard stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right.
That's something that's interesting about the God's Not Dead movies, especially God's Not Dead 2. They're making the case for Jesus. It has an apologetic message, but it doesn't work in Case for Christ does. And like Case for Christ, I'm watching it. I'm like, this movie should not be so captivating where he's literally like the entire movie is him going and interviewing people. Like the scene where he's talking to a psychologist, or the scene where he's talking to the doctor about proof that Jesus died on the cross, stuff like that. You're like, that scene should not be so captivating, but it is. And
well,
they did something.
See, that's another thing that's kind of inevitable in Christian movies is they're very dialogue heavy, and of course, Case for Christ is too. But just I think it's good filmmaking. Case for Christ is, because I was paying attention to the editing. The editing is very much following the conversation and interpreting the conversation. There is no reverse shot trap that some of these movies will fall into. And all the locations are different. Sometimes he's on the phone, sometimes in his office, sometimes he's like traveling the globe to see these people. The locations are always changing, and everybody is always doing something while they're talking. There's always more than one thing to follow during the conversation, which is good. You are telling a story while you're telling two stories at the same time.
Yeah, well, for me,
I feel like a lot of movies are like, okay, here's our explicit message, shot, reverse shot conversation. Here you go.
Yeah. Well, for me, one of the funniest parts of the movie is, and it's like they do a really good job with just like sprinkling the humor in a way that makes sense, is where he's on the phone in his office and somebody has called him like to talk about like the proof that the gospel's reliable or something like that, or I don't remember what it exactly is, but he's talking on the phone and his buddy across the office is a Christian, and he's like, okay, so, and he like hunches down and pulls out his Bible, and he's so embarrassed, and you can just see him like looking to see if his friend is noticing, and his friend is just like, I don't remember. Just expressions are so funny, and so it adds just something that should be boring, quote unquote, but it sprinkles the humor in a way.
Because that guy could have been the know-it-all Christian that every movie seems to have, like the one person who just knows everything about God. That guy could have been the guy, because you hear him talk at the end and you're like, wow, this dude knows stuff, but he just lets Lee figure it out. He's just like, nah. And I think that's so funny. That's more realistic. It's more like actual Christians, a little bit obnoxious, a little bit stubborn, maybe aren't taking the time of day to argue with you because you're a know-it-all.
Yeah. And like, yeah, their relationship is so great. Like at the end of the movie, I think like the scene you're talking about, how Lee is like, I just don't get all this. And the guy just looks at him and goes, you're really irritating. You know that? And it's like,
yeah, he's not nice.
Versus just like, oh, let me explain and hold your hand and explain everything to you. I'm like, if I had a friend say that to me, I don't know. I think I would respond like that. Like, you're really irritating. Come on. If they were like Lee, I'd be like, oh my goodness, come on. being, whatever. So, and, he calls him, like, I remember last time I watched that with my family, I was like, that's a true friend that just basically says, this is what you need to do, figure it out. Stop annoying everybody and just figure it out. Like, calls him on his crap. And that's a true friend.
I was gonna say the one last thing I had to say about character. I think I said everything, but after his conversion, Lee's personality doesn't change.
No.
Like, his flaw is addressed, but he doesn't become a different person, which is
No.
another thing other Christian movies are guilty of. Like, Fireproof, like, at the end, he's in love with his wife and everything is good. And at the beginning, they're like yelling at each other, and it's just like everything changed. And
yeah,
in Case for Christ, he loved his family from the beginning, and he still does. And their family is in a good spot, but he's the same good dad he was in the beginning. He just believes in Jesus.
Yeah, and I think one thing too, the one reason why Case for Christ worked is Lee Strobel was actually involved in making the movie. Like, he was very involved. He was on set. Okay, that's what he was. I knew he was involved. I just couldn't remember exactly what his role was. But I remember I heard this story about. So apparently, there's a story in his real life. I don't know where he tells it, but his dad, literally at one point, he had done something that ticked his dad off, and I don't even know what it was. But his dad basically said, "I don't have enough love for you to film my pinky finger," and they filmed that scene for the movie and they took it out. But at one point after that was over, the actor playing his dad, who actually looks like his dad, walked up to him and stayed in character and said, "I'm sorry." And Lee said he started crying on set because he said, "I didn't get to rebuild my relationship with my dad because he died, but I got to have this healing through an actor that, a father taking a father role." And that's, again, yeah, like I said, I mean, I don't know. I don't really have any specific criticisms of The Case for Christ. I mean, I can't think of anything specific. I'm like, that didn't work, versus almost every other Christian movie. I'm like, that specifically didn't work. And yeah.
I mean, Alfie is a little perfect. He's not a huge character in the story, so it's not like a huge fault.
She's like the Minions.
Oh, that was another thing. I realized Alfie counseling Les, and Les says, "Lee won't listen. I don't know how to get him to accept this Jesus thing." And she says, "Oh, listen, maybe you should do that." He legit tells the Christian to listen to an atheiist. Like, when's the last time you heard the mentor figure say that?
Or just listen to each other. And yeah. I mean, yeah, like, they're not afraid to show his faults. And even like Leslie, she's not perfect either. Like, she has her own faults, and she, and when you see her trying to do like the heavy-handed, like leaving the notes around, like, "God loves you and so do I," that doesn't get through to him. He doesn't like that.
Right.
So, and I mean, I think another thing too is it knows what it is. It's not trying to be an evangelistic movie. I don't know.
Well, yes and no. It's different.
Yeah. Well,
it's appealing to the intellect rather than emotions, though, which is kind of huge.
Yeah. Like,
yeah. Well, it's like, to use the constant counterexample, like God's Not Dead. It's this melodrama that's supposed to make you mad at the evil atheist, and it's all appeals to emotion rather than treating you as a person with a brain.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I think it's really actually insulting to people to just like hand them everything on a silver platter and they don't have to think about anything.
It is.
Like, yeah, like I remember, again, I was watching, maybe you saw it too, Kara. I was watching a video about that Cinema Therapy. It's another YouTube channel. I don't know if you know who they are, Sean, but they do, anyway, they did a video on Luke Skywalker, like Psychology of a Hero, and they got into the sequels, and they said, you notice that, again, I'm not going to say whether it's good or bad, I'm just saying, Luke says, "I came to face him, Leia, and I can't save him." And they said, one thing you have to understand about Rian Johnson's filmmaking style is he likes to trust the audience to catch subtlety. So he's not actually saying that Ben can't be saved. He's saying, "I can't save him." And right. I think that's that's just the concept of, hey, I'm not going to hand everything to the audience. I'm going to trust my audience to be smart enough to figure stuff out.
Right. And like non-Christian movies are 2+2 movies, in Case for Christ is.
Yeah, like it makes sense. It's a well-done movie. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I would say. So, Well, I think it's Say Goodnight Kevin, or I don't know who it is. It might be Say Goodnight Kevin. He says, some of these movies, you're just confirming everything non-Christians already think about Christians. Don't do that,
Right.
please. You're just
Right.
like, oh, they're judgmental, they're obnoxious. Yeah, it's like, that's not even true. Like, I don't mean I mean a few people. I know a few people in real life that I'm like, oh yeah, you meet the stereotypes. You are like that a lot. But anyway, but it's very rare. Like, most people are not like the Christians are portrayed in Christian movies. I know very few people that are actually like that. And I also know very few non-Christians that are like the non-Christians in Christian movies. So anyway. And then again, this is just one super, if you guys don't want to get into this, totally fine with me. But if you guys were to make a faith-based film, what would you do? Like, would you kind of would you follow, like, given what we've been talking about, are there anything that you would like to do if you were to make a faith-based film? Like, I'm talking complete creative control. You can do whatever you want.
Oh, I mean, part of it is the struggle with what you just said goes back to what I said at the beginning. As soon as you say it's a faith-based film, you're putting it in a box that I wouldn't immediately want to be put into.
Okay.
So I think it's tricky because you say if you had complete creative control and you wanted to have a story that had Christian themes, strong Christian themes of whether grace, redemption, Jesus, whatever it is, how would you tackle that? I kind of take those as a couple of different questions.
Okay.
I'm not having an example. Well, this is like a very strange example in a sense, but not in another sense. Have you watched Ted Lasso?
I've seen parts of it.
So I don't want to go too much into it, but it's not even remotely in any sense Christian faith-based anything. It's very wholesome, but it's also very rated R with the language and
I was gonna say, don't they drop the F-bomb frequently?
Yeah, it's very much so. But there's things in it throughout the run of the show that are some of the best examples of grace that I've ever seen in a story.
Yeah.
Which I said, like, I don't want to go into specifics because it's spoils major plot lines.
Yeah.
But remarkable grace in
Yeah.
it. And just a picture of what that looks like. And the idea that, forgiveness, the idea that forgiveness doesn't have to be earned, it's given. Things like that. And so that's where I look at it and I go, if I were to tell a story that was trying to tackle ideas of redemption, grace, there's ways to do that don't immediately put them in the box of faith-based story.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, one thing that I love about like Hacksaw Ridge or Unbreakable.
Right.
Is they're just captivating stories that people are going to be interested in, but the person was a Christian, that's very much a part of who they are. Like, I've already prepped my answer because I actually have a whole pitch for a faith-based film I want to do about Sergeant Alvin York. I don't know how familiar you are with his story, but he was anyway, his story is fantastic. I don't want to go into it right now, but I have a whole video talking about how I did a presentation on how I would make a film about him. But I think it's very similar. It would be very much a Hacksaw Ridge situation where people are like, I just want to see this story. This story is fascinating to me. And, he was a Christian. That's cool. But, whatever. So, and I don't think Hacksaw Ridge, I mean, it's not in any way like necessarily a Christian movie, but it's one of the best Christian movies ever made. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Because Mel Gibson I don't know much about his status on faith or whatever it plays. So I don't know what his faith is, or you look at I know you're not the biggest fan of it, but look at to me, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe it's a Christian movie that wasn't made by a Christian. I don't think Andrew Adamson is a Christian, but it's well done. And it has some great themes of redemption, grace, like you said. And because Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is on pretty much every reading list in public school, including public schools, people went to see it. Like, one of my coworkers who's not a Christian, that's one of her favorite movies. So I think you just have to find, I think you said the trick is finding that space where that non-Christians can appreciate too, because it's a good story.
Well, and to even go to answer your question without not answering, without changing the parameters, I mean, it is kind of what you just said of, I think you find the stories worth telling of people that faith is a big part of their journey. Yeah. And what are those compelling, interesting stories, and tell those.
Yeah. And they don't even need necessarily, like, you have all these people trying to come up with the sermon illustration movies. They write a big original script. I'm like, there's actually so many beautiful stories. Like, there's so many heroes of the faith that I think people would just be interested in hearing. Like, I know The Hiding Place is super old, but I bet if they made a new version of The Hiding Place about Corrie ten Boom's life, people would watch it. I don't know, maybe not, but it's just an interesting story. I don't know. I've never seen The Hiding Place, unfortunately, but I think that's one thing. Sorry, Kara, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Sorry, I just can't tell when people are done talking. It's always been a problem.
Papa's done. Go ahead.
I think if I got the chance, I would probably steer away from doing faith-based films, just because I don't feel prepared to tackle it. But at the same way, I feel like most movies, faith-based or non-faith-based, do have a very large Christian fan base because it's the biggest religion in the country. And so, also, having grown up in it my whole life in the Christian culture and being a PK, I feel like I have a special way to relate to the Christian culture and preach to the choir in a good way. I would rather make a quote-unquote secular film, just like as in not being explicitly Christian, that would appeal the Christian audience, but also challenge the Christian audience, because they are in all movies have, a large Christian audience. I feel like all stories can be beneficial to all people, so I think I don't think I would want to go the faith-based route.
Well, this might be a little of a reach, but you think about like Pixar. They have taught so many lessons through their. I mean, they're fun stories, but at its core, it has a really like quote unquote adult theme, but it's totally families can watch them together. Like Finding Nemo is about parenting and letting go.
Yeah.
If you love your kids, let them go. And
right.
I don't know, some of the other ones that are just really like thematically rich, like Inside Out. The core of the movie, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to struggle.
And like you have the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is still like pervasive in the culture, and even though it's been you can argue that it's been watered down, and you can also argue that it's being taken too far. Like, are the people who are fighting against Christianity, are they rejecting certain themes, or are they overemphasizing others? The answer is both. And so both sides of, like, whether it's political or social issues, both sides are taking arguments that are based in Christian concepts, like whether it's we should stand up for what's right or we should love everyone kind of deal. Both are founded in scripture. It's just like you find on these issues that are polarizing, and studios will make these big films on either side, but either side can find the core of it in believe in, because Christianity has deeply impacted the culture that like huge films, like people who are like like the conservatives will say like, oh, Disney like hates us, but they love the Pixar films that they highly resonate with the messages, because it's just can't get away from the fact that it's universal no matter what. And so I don't think you have to tell faith-based films necessarily.
Yeah, no, you just have to tell stories that people are going to resonate with. And like my thesis or my life goal as a filmmaker is make stories that entertain people, but also make them better people. Teach them lessons. And I don't think it all needs to be, but Jesus is the answer. And I mean, like you said, talk about like, and also wondering again, why what I love to talk about this kind of stuff is there's a quote. I don't know if either of you guys have read Sheldon Van Auken. He was a friend of C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you've read A Severe Mercy or anything like that. Highly recommend it. And they have an audiobook on Audible, I believe. So, I mean, it's not like you can listen to it too, but basically he was an atheist, and he said he and his wife had written off God. They were too smart for God, but they loved each other and they had a great marriage. Like they had an amazing marriage. That was their goal in life, to have a good relationship with each other. And then they go to Oxford to study for a while. And this was in the 50s when C.S. Lewis's books were coming out, and they decided to start reading them. And then Lewis just lived on the other side of the city. So Van Auken decides one night he's just going to write him a letter. Like he was talking to him. And then he literally starts the letter with, I'm probably going to tear this up in the morning because this feels too presumptuous. But he writes this whole letter asking him some questions. And C.S. Lewis was apparently notorious for answering his mail. And so they get to be friends. And during this process, because Lewis had been an atheist. He was not like, you need to come to Christ right now. He was totally fine with allowing him his time to become a Christian or whatever. I don't know what it was. And Van Auken writes in his journal, the best evidence for God are Christians, and the worst evidence for God are the best evidence against God are Christians, the best evidence for God are Christians. And he lists off the differences between, the Christians that are good example and Christians that are bad example. And unfortunately, I think Christian movies are often the example of why people don't want to be Christians, because they think that's what we are. And that's what we can be sometimes. So again, that's why I think, again, like I said, the example of love and grace. I think Sheldon Van Auken's life story would make a great movie. So, again, it's because he's a real person.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this was awesome just to talk about everything. And all right. Thank you. Okay.